In a country where truth is often drowned by noise and power, a single forgotten veteran dared to speak, not with anger, not with protest, but with a trembling hand and a tear-stained letter. His words didn't demand justice. They whispered a truth so raw, it shattered the silence of the highest office in the land. This is not just a story about war or honor, it's about the soul of a nation, the price of indifference, and the strength it takes to stand tall when the world has forgotten you. This is the letter that changed the president. In the dim glow of the late afternoon, inside a nearly forgotten wing of St. Augustine Veterans Hospital, an elderly man sat slouched in a creaking wheelchair, his hands trembling slightly as they held a worn, yellowed envelope. His name was George Walker, a former war hero whose name had long since faded from the headlines and whose sacrifices were buried beneath years of silence. His once proud frame had withered, and his eyes, once sharp and commanding, now carried a distant, haunted look, as though he saw ghosts no one else could. The nurses passed by with practiced indifference, but one paused, a young woman named Emily, new to the ward and still soft around the edges. George called her over with a faint nod, his voice raspy but deliberate. "You still believe the truth matters?" he asked her, not waiting for an answer. Slowly, he extended the envelope, fingers shaking not from weakness but from the weight of what was inside. Emily hesitated before taking it, sensing that this was more than just a letter. George's grip lingered for a moment, his eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity. "If they ever listen," he whispered, "tell them I was never silent. They just refuse to hear." That night, after her shift ended, Emily sat alone in the break room and opened the envelope. What she found inside, a confession, a cover-up, a plea for justice buried by those in power, would not only shatter her sense of the world but ultimately land in the hands of the President of the United States. And in doing so, it would ignite a storm the country had long tried to forget. Emily sat frozen, the crisp edges of the aged letter trembling slightly between her fingers. The air in the hospital waiting room felt thicker now, almost suffocating, as if the truth within those handwritten pages had somehow changed its very atmosphere. Her eyes traced each line again, slower this time, though her heart was racing. Every word etched by George's shaky hand peeled back a layer of history, a history buried not just in official files, but in shame, fear, and deliberate silence. The revelation was staggering. George Walker, the quiet, dignified old man she had known only as her late father's best friend, had carried the weight of a lie for decades, a lie crafted not by him, but by those in power who needed a scapegoat. He had tried to speak out. He had pushed back. And for that, they had broken him. Branded him unstable. Discharged him in disgrace. Erased him from honor and memory. Emily's throat tightened. It was no longer just a letter. It was a confession. A plea. A ticking time bomb. She gripped the paper tighter, her knuckles whitening as her thoughts spiraled. Her mind was torn between disbelief and anger. How many lives had been affected by this cover-up? How many people had looked away, had let it happen? And why now? Why had George waited all these years to tell someone? Why her? Her gaze drifted to the small clock on the wall. The ticking seemed louder than it should have been, counting down to something inevitable. The names in the letter were no strangers to her. One was now a respected senator, another sat on the board of a major defense corporation. They weren't relics of the past. They were still in control, still shaping the world, and still untouchable, unless this story came to light. Emily reached for her phone, her fingers still shaky. She opened the voice recorder, then paused. No, this wasn't something she could rush. She needed to be careful. Strategic. One wrong step, and not only would the story be buried, but George could face retaliation even now. So could she. As she slipped the letter carefully back into its envelope and tucked it inside her coat, her pulse pounded with new purpose. She wasn't just holding paper. She was holding truth, and with it, responsibility. A gentle knock interrupted her storm of thoughts. "Emily?" A nurse peeked through the door, her voice soft. "George is awake. He's asking for you." Emily stood slowly, as if grounding herself for what came next. The hallway to his room stretched ahead like a corridor to confrontation, not just with George, but with everything she was about to uncover. She didn't know exactly what she would say when she saw him, but she knew this: from this moment on, her life would no longer be quiet. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for the door handle, feeling its cold surface under her fingertips, like an unyielding barrier between her and the confrontation she had been avoiding for weeks. Each step had felt heavier than the last as she made her way down the long, sterile hallway, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic, a sharp reminder that this was a place of endings, not beginnings. She had tried to push it all out of her mind, but the weight of the letter in her coat pocket, the confession she had read over and over, trying to make sense of it, had only grown heavier with every passing minute. She paused just before opening the door to George's room. She had never imagined finding herself here, facing him like this. The man who had been a father figure, a protector in her life, the one who had always been there, now reduced to a fragile, vulnerable shadow of the person he once was. The man who had kept secrets from her, buried under layers of lies, was now laying in front of her, his once strong presence now diminished. Her chest tightened as she thought of everything she had learned, everything that had come crashing down over the past few days. The letter had shaken her to the core, but it wasn't the truth of what had happened that haunted her the most. It was the realization that everything she had believed to be true had been nothing but a fragile illusion. Her father's best friend, her mentor, had betrayed him in a way that was unforgivable. And worse, he had betrayed her by keeping this truth from her, robbing her of the choice to make sense of her own life. With a deep, shaky breath, she pushed the door open. The room was dim, the blinds half drawn, casting the space in a melancholic glow. The hospital bed was the only thing in the room that seemed real, the sterile sheets and thin blankets stark against the cold, white walls. George was lying there, a faint outline of the man he used to be, his body so frail, it almost seemed as though the bed itself might swallow him whole. He had once been a towering figure in her life, full of authority, wisdom, and strength. Now, he was little more than a sickly, broken shell, barely able to move. Her heart caught in her throat as her eyes landed on him. She had seen him in this state before, weak, but never so defeated. She had never thought she would find herself here, in this quiet room, confronting the man who had been like family. The man who had kept secrets for so long, and who, now, was laying in front of her, unable to escape the weight of the choices he had made. The air between them felt suffocating, thick with unsaid words. Her voice, when it came, was smaller than she wanted it to be, fragile like glass. "George?" At the sound of her voice, his eyelids fluttered open. For a moment, he looked lost, as though he were struggling to recognize where he was, who was speaking to him. Then, his gaze sharpened, and his lips parted, but no words came out. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the guilt that seemed to weigh him down like an anchor, keeping him tethered to the past he had tried so desperately to bury. "Emily," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper, heavy with regret and something else, fear. "I didn't think you'd come." She took a step forward, her heart thudding in her chest as the anger she had been holding back for so long bubbled to the surface. She had expected this moment to be full of righteous fury, the culmination of all the betrayal she had felt. But now, looking at him, this frail, broken man, her emotions felt tangled, as though they couldn't decide whether to be angry or to mourn. Maybe both. "I read your letter," she said, her voice low but steady, trying to maintain control. She hadn't expected this moment to come with so many layers of grief. It should have been simple: confrontation, accusation, release. Instead, it felt like something far more complex, something more painful. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the silence between them stretch, as if he were trying to summon the courage to speak. When he finally opened his eyes again, they were filled with a sorrow that seemed too deep to articulate. "I never wanted you to know this way." His words were slow, deliberate, as though every syllable cost him something. "I never wanted you to see me like this, weak, a shadow of the man you knew." The ache in Emily's chest deepened, and for a brief moment, she felt the sting of tears threatening to rise. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to lash out, to demand that he explain why he had done what he did, why he had let the lies fester for so long. But instead, she felt hollow, like the very foundation of her life was being ripped apart. "You think this is about me seeing you like this?" Emily's voice shook now, her emotions spilling over in a way she couldn't control. "You think I care about your weakness? About how you look to me now? No. What matters is that you've lied to me. 4 years. And I've spent my whole life believing in someone who wasn't even real." She stepped closer to the bed, the letter now heavy in her hand, the paper crinkling under the pressure. "I read everything, George. I know what you did. How you betrayed my father. How you made sure he would never find out the truth." His eyes widened, the sorrow turning into something more desperate, more agonizing. "I didn't want him to know," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I thought if I kept it all buried, it would save you both. I thought it would protect you." Emily's hands clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms as she fought to keep her composure. "Protect me?" She let out a bitter laugh, her chest tightening as a wave of frustration washed over her. "You think keeping this from me, keeping it from him, was protecting us? No, George, it was selfish. It was cowardice. You didn't protect anyone. You just made sure no one ever knew the truth, including me." His gaze dropped, and for a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint beeping of the heart monitor beside him. She could see the weight of his guilt in every line of his face, in the way he refused to look her in the eye. He had been a father to her, a mentor, and yet all of that was built on a lie. The betrayal, the manipulation, it all swirled in her mind like a dark storm cloud. "I didn't want you to have to carry it," George whispered, his voice so faint now that she almost couldn't hear him. "I didn't want you to know what I did. But I was wrong. You deserve to know. You deserve the truth." For a moment, Emily stood frozen, the truth swirling around her like dust in the wind. Her father's best friend, her mentor, the man who had always been there for her, had betrayed them both. But the worst part, the part that stung more than any of it, was that she had believed in him for so long. Now, everything she had known felt like a house of cards, ready to crumble at the slightest touch. With the letter still in her hand, she let out a shaky breath, her chest heaving with the weight of everything that had come to light. "I wish you had told me sooner," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I wish I hadn't had to find out this way." George's eyes filled with tears, the silent admission of his failure hanging between them. He had ruined so much. And now, all he could offer was a broken apology, one that felt hollow in the face of the truth. Emily stood in the doorway, her heart pounding so fiercely she could feel the beat in her throat. The room around her seemed to close in, the walls pressing tighter as the weight of the moment anchored her in place. George sat slumped in his chair, his frail body a testament to the years of decline, but it wasn't his physical state that rattled her. No, it was the man he used to be, the man she had trusted completely, that was now nothing more than a hollow memory, a faint echo of a person who had betrayed everything she thought she knew. The confession had been brutal, a truth so raw it burned through the layers of years they had spent side by side. George had known. He had known all along about the lies, the secrets, the manipulations that had shaped Emily's world. But he had never told her, never let her see the truth. Instead, he had wrapped her in a false sense of security, pretending to be the guardian he once was, while behind her back, he had made choices that had torn their lives apart. She wanted to scream, to demand more from him, but the words were lodged in her throat, heavy and suffocating. Her mind was a whirlwind of rage, disbelief, and sadness, each emotion fighting for dominance, yet none of them strong enough to overpower the numbness that threatened to consume her. "I don't know what you expect from me, George," she said, her voice trembling, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. She forced herself to take a step forward, closer to him, but the space between them felt like an abyss. Every inch felt like a barrier she couldn't cross. "I can't just forgive you. I can't forget this. Not after everything you've done." George's eyes, those tired, once confident eyes, bore into hers, filled with a kind of desperation that made Emily want to look away. He lifted one hand shakily, his fingers twitching in the air as if he wanted to reach out to her, to somehow bridge the gap that had grown between them. But even his attempt at movement felt weak, fragile, like the man before her was barely holding himself together. "I never meant for this to happen, Emily," he said softly, his voice a rasp. "I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me." But it got out of control. "I didn't know how to stop it. I was trying to protect you. I didn't want you to know." Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. The anger surged again, but beneath it was a deep sadness, a grief that she couldn't shake, no matter how much she wanted to. It wasn't just the lies he had told her. It was the fact that everything she had built her life around had been based on a false foundation, and the wreckage of that truth was now laid bare before her. "Protect me," she echoed bitterly, stepping closer now, her eyes blazing with disbelief. "You call this protection? You've ruined everything, George. Everything I've worked for, everything I thought I understood. And you don't even get to decide what's best for me anymore. Not after this." The silence that followed her words was deafening. George's gaze dropped to his hands, as if the weight of her words had physically struck him. He wasn't the strong, imposing figure he used to be, the man who had held all the answers, who had been the pillar of support in her life. Now, he was just a shadow of himself, a broken man whose words held no power to undo the damage he had done. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said, his voice low and regretful. "I never wanted you to find out this way. I was afraid of losing you. I thought if I kept it hidden, I could protect you from the truth. But I see now that I've only made it worse." The tears she had been holding back for what felt like hours finally spilled over, her face flushed with the intensity of her feelings. Anger. Betrayal. Confusion. A mix of emotions so overwhelming that she didn't know what to do with herself. She had spent so many years looking up to him, trusting him without question, and now she had to confront the person he had truly been all along. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she wiped away the tears. Her hands trembled as she spoke again, but this time her voice was more composed, the hurt in it sharper than before. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly as she searched his face for some sign of remorse, something more than just empty words. "I don't know if I can look at you the same way again. And I'm not sure I want to." The weight of her words hung in the air, the finality of them sinking deep into George's chest. His face crumpled as if he had been struck, and he let out a slow, shaky breath. "Please, Emily, don't hate me," he whispered, his voice breaking, raw with emotion. "I've made so many mistakes. I know that now. But I never wanted to hurt you. You were always the most important thing in my life. But it was too late for that. The past couldn't be rewritten, no matter how much George might want it to be. The years of lies, the moments of silence, the trust that had been chipped away bit by bit, none of it could be undone with a single apology. And even though Emily felt a pang of sympathy for him, it wasn't enough to erase the damage. She couldn't just forget what he had done. She couldn't simply pretend that it didn't matter. I need to go, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible now, as if the words were too heavy to say aloud. I need time to think. To figure out who I am without you in my life. She turned toward the door, her footsteps heavy with the weight of finality, but her heart felt lighter with each step she took away from him. As her hand reached for the door handle, she hesitated, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. For a brief moment, she considered looking back. But no, she couldn't. She had already seen too much. The door clicked softly behind her as she stepped into the unknown, the silence of the room pressing in on her as she walked away from everything she had ever known. Emily's feet felt as if they were dragging her through the long, cold hallway. The house, once full of warmth and laughter, now seemed impossibly empty. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, her body burdened not just by the weight of her own exhaustion but by the crushing realization of the truth. She had never imagined that something so sacred could fall apart so quickly. She paused for a moment, her hand pressed against the cool wall as she fought to steady her breathing, trying to regain some sense of control over the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Her mind replayed the words George had said, each one echoing like a distant drumbeat in her head. I never wanted this. I was only trying to protect you. Those words, empty, hollow, felt like a betrayal in themselves. Emily had trusted him. She had loved him. And now, all of it seemed like a lie, a web of half-truths and promises broken long before she ever had the chance to see them come to fruition. The house was so quiet now, its silence pressing in from all sides. Even the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft rustling of leaves outside the window, seemed out of place. It was the kind of silence that made her feel suffocated, as if the walls were closing in on her, trapping her in her own thoughts. She had never realized how much the sound of life, the chatter and the warmth of family, had masked the underlying tension in the air. Now, it was deafening. As she turned the corner toward the front door, her body felt disconnected from her mind, like she was merely going through the motions. She had to leave. She had to escape, if only for a moment, to breathe, to think, to stop feeling like she was drowning in the weight of everything she had just learned. But then, as if summoned by the storm of emotions swirling inside her, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Her heart jumped in her chest, and before she could even react, Rachel appeared. The younger sister's face was a mirror of concern, her features tight with worry, her eyes searching Emily's face as if looking for answers to questions that hadn't even been asked yet. Rachel's voice was quiet but insistent, a soft tremor betraying the strength she was trying to convey. What's going on? What happened? Emily didn't respond at first. She couldn't. Her throat felt thick with the unshed tears, the emotion too raw and tangled for words to make sense of. She stood frozen, eyes scanning Rachel's face, looking for something, anything, that could anchor her in this moment. But all she saw was her sister, her innocent concern, and the crushing weight of everything that had just shattered. I don't know how to explain it, Rachel. Everything's falling apart. Emily's voice broke at the last word, and she found herself unable to stop the tears from spilling over, hot and unstoppable. Rachel's hand reached out instinctively, a small gesture that held more weight than Emily could have imagined. Her fingers brushed against Emily's arm, a silent offer of comfort, but it wasn't just that. It was the unspoken promise of solidarity, of support, of not having to face this alone. Rachel had always been there, the rock when everything around her seemed to crumble. The floodgates that Emily had tried so desperately to hold shut came pouring open in that instant. She collapsed into her sister's arms, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. "How could he do this, Rachel? How could he lie to me like this?" Rachel held her tighter, pressing her sister's head gently against her chest, stroking her hair with the same tenderness she had shown when they were children. "I don't know, Em. I don't know," she whispered. "But you're not alone. I'm here. We're going to get through this. Together." The words were simple, but they cut through the haze of pain, grounding Emily in a way she hadn't expected. She'd spent so much time trying to be the strong one, trying to shield Rachel from the harshness of the world. But now, in this moment, Rachel was the one holding her up. Emily realized then that it was okay to not have all the answers, that she didn't have to shoulder this burden on her own. Her breathing slowed as the storm inside her began to settle. The anger that had burned in her chest was still there, but it wasn't as sharp anymore, tempered by the comforting warmth of her sister's embrace. Slowly, she pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, taking in Rachel's face for the first time with a clarity she hadn't had before. "I've been so caught up in trying to fix everything that I forgot what really mattered," Emily said softly, her voice trembling but steadier now. "I've been so focused on the past, I didn't see how much I've had right here the whole time." Rachel smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that spoke volumes of understanding. "You don't have to fix everything, Em. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is take it one day at a time. And I'll be right here, no matter what happens." Emily nodded, the weight on her chest feeling a little lighter, the hope returning to her chest like a flicker of light in the darkness. "I know. And I won't let this break me, Rachel. I promise." Together, they stood there, a quiet understanding passing between them, as the storm outside raged on. But inside, in the shelter of each other's presence, there was peace. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they could face it together. Some heroes wear medals. Others carry scars, deep, invisible, and unspoken. Today, because one man refused to let his pain die in silence, and one nurse refused to look away, the truth was heard. It wasn't easy. It shook the walls of power, exposed a buried injustice, and forced a leader to face the humanity he'd almost forgotten. In the end, it wasn't just a letter. It was a mirror. A mirror that showed us who we are, and who we must choose to be. To all those who served, and those still waiting to be heard, we see you now.